based on Arnstein's ladder, which we'll no doubt hear more about this afternoon, and the IAP2 framework, and as well as case studies to demonstrate where good practice is happening. Sorry, as well as case studies to demonstrate where good practice is happening. And the report's been referenced by the OECD, the TUC, the ODI, the UN Partnership for Sustainable Development, among others, and organisations like NHS are now actively working on data stewardship. So the whole environment has moved on somewhat over the last few years. It's certainly been foundational within ADA, and I'll just tell you a few things about that. So our vision for a positive future of data governance, which was expressed in a report called Rethinking Data, has participation as one of the 4 mechanisms that need to be explored in order for that to be successful. We worked with the NHS AI Lab to propose what we think is the first model for a participatory algorithmic impact assessment, ensuring data access requests take the needs and views of data subjects into account. So that's an example of this sort of participatory practice. And we've also explored what participation means as an emerging practice in a technology company. More about that. So at ADA, we continue to put public voice at the centre of what we do. And just today, we published a report on existing research into public attitudes to AI, which pulls together evidence from quantitative and qualitative methods and concludes that there are 4 stable points of public sentiment around AI. This will be interesting for the government to hear. Don't know whether they're listening. People have positive attitudes to some uses of AI, for example, in health and science development. There are concerns about AI for decision making with substantial consequences on people's everyday lives. So, for example, job recruitment, for example, access to financial support. And there's strong support for the protection of fundamental rights, for example, privacy. And there is a very strong belief that regulation is needed. It's not an exaggeration to say that none of this work would have happened without REMA's early leadership. So today, the ESRC Digital Good Network, Ada Lovelace Institute and Liverpool Civic Data Cooperative are excited to announce this new programme of work. It's understood as an approach that actively involves and includes people in the governance and use of their own data. We'll explore together the live and topical issues raised by inclusive and participatory data stewardship, including how to ensure that data is stewarded in a way that's fair, equitable and beneficial to all, how to give people more control over their data and address the challenges of equity and inclusivity, and how to build trust and collaboration between data holders and users. We'll also introduce you to the work programme today, which consists of a landscape review of best practice, qualitative social research interviews that will develop into new case studies of innovations, and the development of an international community of practice. And we're hoping that some of you will step forward into being members of this. So thank you for joining us. We're all very excited about this project. We hope that many of you will come on this journey with us. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Rima Patel to tell us more about the programme. Then we'll hear from Emily from the Liverpool Data Cooperative and me on Ada's thinking around landscape mapping. And then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. First, I do need to do a little bit of housekeeping. We want to hear, please, as we go on, from people in the room and online. We have many people online today, so a special hello and welcome to all of you. If you're here in the room, there is tea, coffee and biscuits outside, and do help yourselves before afterwards. If you're at home, I'm afraid you'll have to cater for yourselves, but do make yourselves comfortable. And we do want you to feel included. If you have any technical problems, please write them in the chat. And Zoe, who's here with us, will leap into action to fix them. And please save your questions until after the talks. If you want to ask them in person, obviously, and if you're in the room, put your hands up. If you're online, you can either type them into the Q&A, or please do put your hand up if you'd like to ask the question, and we'll patch you in. That's it for housekeeping. So Rima, over to you.
Thank you. Well done. So yeah, big thanks to Octavia, who has spoken very eloquently about many things, but one of the things she forgot to mention was her own role in the original report. And I'm very grateful to Octavia, because what Octavia did was take a very large, unwieldy mass of text and really knock it into something that you all now see, and that is the value and the worth of really good editor brings, you know. So huge thanks to Octavia for her editorial support and her contribution. And actually many of you, I remember having conversations with many of you over the years about different initiatives, and some of that really went into the thinking of participatory data stewardship, going to workshops and roundtables that were convened by other organisations. So I think, in a way, what's in that report is a crystallisation of many people's work. I also wanted, before I make a start, to say a big thank you to the team at Sheffield and Cambridge, and Helen, Candy and Gina Neff in particular, because we wouldn't be able to drive this next version forward without them. So a huge thank to you both for all of that, and then the wider team at the ESRC Digital Good Network, who are incredible. So a roadmap for participatory and inclusive data stewardship. And I suppose the question to ask is why do more work on this? We've done work already, and in a way, I think the answer to that was we just felt the work hadn't yet finished. It had begun, it hadn't finished. The report went out there, you had this reference, but there's still a long way to go until, you know, it's almost not worth talking about or thinking about, because it's just normal. It's just the way we do data governance. So that's what good looks like. And obviously we want to invite you to join us on this journey. So in terms of the context, there have been numerous calls to rethink data, to really reshape and reframe what data use and governance looks like, to think about it as something collectively shared, something that we all have a role in shaping, and to do this in ethical ways. And we have seen an emerging field that is very much testing and piloting and prototyping innovation. So Emily's definitely going to be sharing her own experience in that context going forward. And then I think there's also something important about not going into this, you know, wholly uncritically. So there are risks there. There's the risk of performativity, like looking like you're doing participation, but not actually having a meaningful feedback loop. There's the risk of reinforcing asymmetries of power, you know, and really worsening data injustices. And then there's also the risk of tokenism. So, you know, looking again like people are being involved and shaping governance of their data without actually giving them the chance to really do that. So I suppose that one observation that I bring now, looking back on that work, is we haven't yet integrated this field with the field of work on data justice and inclusive data stewardship. So, you know, we think about issues of control, the fact that some groups and communities are underrepresented. They're either underrepresented in the data or underrepresented in the ability to govern and manage and use their own data. I think there's something about bringing that into this conversation. That's one of the things that we're seeking to do, really thinking about inclusion, participation and regulation, and a sort of intersection of these factors. So how do you create a broader environment in which data stewardship initiatives are, you know, operating in a safely regulated field? My colleague Valentina Pavlova there has done loads of work on that. But also, how do you ensure that in the process there's adequate inclusion of minoritized groups and communities and participation? And in a way, it's really hard to be at the centre of this Venn diagram and develop things at the centre of this diagram. There's real tensions and trade-offs and push and pull. And what we want to do is sort of understand, well, how do we develop data systems that are at the centre of this Venn diagram? So I won't say too much about the first report, but except to flag that in that first report, we set out a spectrum of participatory approaches that go all the way from informing people, so about how data is being governed, involving people, working with them to ensure concerns and aspirations are represented, reflected in data governance, collaboration, and empowerment. So, I mean, there's a spectrum, a range of different approaches to engagement, and there are lots of case studies in the original report, but there's more case studies emerging, and one of the things we want to do is to look at what these new case studies are and what else they might tell us about this question of a Venn diagram. Now, one of the things, the spectrum comes from some work, it's really seminal work by Sherry Arnstein, who talked about the ladder of citizen participation. And when I went back to the report, I dug out another quote, because what she did was she gave us a challenge to, she challenged participation specialists, and she said, well, does participation really address systems of oppression? Can it, and how can it? And I'm going to read this quote because it's lovely and it sort of summarizes the challenge. The idea of citizen participation is a bit like eating spinach. No one is against it in principle because it is good for you, a revered idea that is vigorously applauded by virtually everyone. The applause is reduced to polite hand claps, however, when this principle is advocated by the have-not blacks, Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, Indians, Eskimos, and white. And when the have-nots define participation as redistribution of power, the American consensus on the fundamental principle explodes. ... And I, I love that because she just sort of has it bang on. Really, it's about power. And when you think about participation, redistribution of power, you're looking at power relationships. So really meaningful assessment of participation needs to acknowledge asymmetries of power in order to help redress that. So the next question is, how might inequity play out in involving people in data governance infrastructure? And here there's a really interesting framework which asks and invites people to reflect on their own privileges and maybe their own experiences of oppression. So at an individual level, this plays out in terms of the internalization of oppressions, or indeed at an individual level, this plays out in terms of how people might act in oppressive ways to other individuals. There's a sort of interpersonal dimension there, so interactions can sometimes become the site where bias discrimination plays out. There's the institutional level, so histories and centuries of institutions, particularly old institutions, may have just normalized ways of working that mean that power dynamics are reinforced. And I mean, the last couple of years and since participatory data stewardship has been released, and a number of events have really illustrated this, the role of institutions in reinforcing power dynamics. The Black Lives Matter movement in particular spoke to that, but there have been other movements too. And then structural and systemic, and this is the really tricky bit, which is this is about how policies, practices, systems and structure, of which data systems are undoubtedly a part, can create overlapping hierarchies. So actually, to think about what a data system is, it's a way to categorize people, to class them, to ascribe them a certain safe status. So that in and of itself, there are systemic issues really when we're thinking about data systems. And then, so what's the role of data systems in reinforcing power dynamics and asymmetry? Well, you have these systems of oppression that I've just spoken about, and some of them are systems such as classism, sexism, ableism, racism, colonialism. There's a whole bunch of others, and they layer on top of each other, and they work to reinforce power dynamics, and they manifest as bias, problematic behaviours and actions, prejudice, stereotype, and then reinforce the cycle, and you kind of go on and on and on and on. And so there's something important about thinking about this in the context of Sherry Arnstein's challenge to us of participation is only really meaningful when we're addressing power asymmetry. And this is an analysis of asymmetry for power and how they work and they operate. Why data and what's its connection to AI? Well, colleagues at the Turing Institute published a piece in the British Medical Journal, and also my former colleague Aidan Pepin, I think he was involved in writing this piece. But real world patterns of inequality manifest, and then they bake themselves into discriminatory data, and then that is used to design it biased AI, and then you've also got real world patterns that might bake themselves into the use of AI in a particular way, and then you result in application injustices that then create a less fair world, and then we go back around that cycle again. So yeah, that's why it matters, because AI, we're just around the corner from the AI Safety Summit. It's only as good as the data that we have. So that's a sort of new reframed analysis of the problem, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and your views on that. Certainly it's a kind of analysis of the problem that may be extended from the work that I did at the Ada Lovelace Institute, not just on participation, but also on inclusion. Another paper was the data divide. Octavia kindly, I think we loop back to where Octavia left it, which is the question, the research question, but also I think the knowledge exchange question for the field, which is this. In developing participatory data stewardship innovations, what works for whom, in what respects, to what extent, in what context and how, what does not work and why. So it's a realist approach, but to understanding this and taking account of a range of case studies. How are we doing this? So the Ada Lovelace Institute is leading a landscape review, and will take account of lots of literature that has emerged in this space. I think Octavia mentioned some of the organisations that had already been involved in responding to that work. And the ESRC Digital Good Network is leading on interviews, so essentially getting a set of case studies and understanding this what works question to be qualitative social research interview. And then Emily and the Liverpool Civic Data Cooperative is leading on the community of practice. And altogether, that's aimed to shape a few things: an ESRC Digital Good Index, a report, because it's not research without a report, is it? I'm joking. And a toolkit, and the most important thing is actually field building. So you're engaged in this conversation. We want you to continue being engaged, and we want you to sort of really feel that this work is for you. So it's for you to help shape and inform your practice. So that's enough for me. I'm probably gone way over time. I reassure my colleagues that I'm excellent at timekeeping, which is clearly not true. So over to Emily. Oh.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Rima. Octavia and Rima did extremely well at saying the word participatory. I'm absolutely going to mispronounce it about 10 times, so just pretend like I said it right and we'll roll with it. So as Rima mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about a specific case study that we have recently completed in the Liverpool city region, and a little bit of why it reinforced our desire to lead on a community of practice. So a little bit about the Civic Data Cooperative. We are a Liverpool City Region Combined Authority funded project to set up data governance systems in the Liverpool City Region. We're hosted at the University of Liverpool. We do a lot of different projects about bringing data into action in Liverpool while also handling ethical stewardship models. So a lot of that looks like improving the way that data gets into research and understanding what data can and can't do. A lot of it looks like giving small grants to SMEs who are trying to change their communities using data. But my area, and therefore the most important part of the work we do, is around public participation and participatory methods with data. So I want to talk a little bit about building community-led data hubs, specifically a project we call Round Ear. So Round Ear, which was named by Kaya, who's in the room right here, is about building community-designed and governed well-being data hubs using participatory research. when we came to this project, we had a lot of questions about what do we mean by a data hub? What do we mean by participation? And how do we really realistically create a governance model for data in a region where we can't really turn the tap off of data? We can't say to people, we're going to stop sharing your data. This is really about looking forward and saying, how can we use data in your community to do something different in a way that you want it done? So what we approached this project with was saying, we don't know the meaning of any of this. We don't know what a data hub is or what it could do for you. We just want to build you a civic data resource, and we want to work with a community to do that. So we wrapped it around a question of well-being. We didn't want to go into community and start building relationships and saying, it's all about data. That's really hard for a lot of people to engage with. When you say the word data, a lot of people think about their mobile phone data. They are not thinking about AI systems and data in the same way that we are. So we use the term well-being and said, what do you want your community to look like from a well-being perspective? What makes you feel well? And then how do we build a data hub that measures that definition of well-being better? So this was based on a lot of research. If you can tell by my accent, I am not Scouse. I'm not from Liverpool. I am from Canada, and there was some amazing work done out there called Measuring Wellness, which was a First Nations data sovereignty project about redefining the surveys that are measured about people in First Nations in Canada. So we took that model and we said, what if we did this in the Liverpool City region? So there's just a quick listing of the project team. We worked with Capacity, which is a policy and service organization in the Liverpool City region, as well as partners at the Centre for Digital Media and Society and the Heseltine Institute at the university. So our project was sited in a place called Widnes. It's a little south of Liverpool. It is as told to me, a rugby town, an old factory town, a place that if you were asking the Conservative government here, they would call a left behind community. I hate that term, but that is how it is defined. Instead of going to community and saying, we're going to do interviews with you to define wellness, we're going to do this more traditional qualitative research project, we instead came in and said, what do you want us to do here? So we spent about 6 months just having conversations with people in community centers, in the VCA, in different organizations about where the project should be and who we should be talking to. We then did a series of training exercise with community researchers. So we employed 15 people to work with us to design a research project for their community about data and well-being. So that happened just before the summer, over the spring. We then said to those residents, all right, we've designed this project together. Let's go forward and do it. So over the summer, they went out and did over 200 interviews with people in their local community, asking them, what makes you feel well? What does well-being mean to you? And do you ever think about data? What does that mean to you? A few photos of what we did. So our lovely community researchers are photographed here all around a table, me leaning forward very seriously. They're giving the training. A little bit about what we heard. So after we finished the interviews, we did a mapping exercise and we said, we've had this, and I'll talk about a little bit, this definition of well-being and what it means to you. What data is there about that? So we spent a couple days working with them to identify all the automated ways data is collected about those things and how it could link together. So what we heard from the residents and from our community researchers is that Widnes is a place that has a very strong pride of the past and a really strong sense of nostalgia. You know, the classic stories of when I was growing up, everyone got together on a Saturday evening and we all supported each other. But that sense was no longer there. Some of that was due to COVID, some of that was due to the deindustrialization of the neighborhoods. But people had a big sense of hope that they could get back to something or grow to something that was different. And that is not necessarily what we expected to hear. When you say, how do you measure well-being? You think physical well-being, my sense of happiness, my sense of connectedness. We heard all of that as well, of course. But that sense of pride of the past and nostalgia was definitely something that was not in the data. Second, we heard a lot about wanting Widnes to be a place where people are able to stay through all life stages and be able to define for themselves what a good life meant, as well as a recognition in the role of agency in community opportunity and service provision. They wanted not just to be able to say, I can choose the coffee shop I go to. They want to be able to choose the kinds of services that are available to them. What we didn't hear a lot about, as you can imagine, is data. when we said the word data, a lot of people said, why would you want to know about data? You asked me about well-being. Some of that is the question design, but a lot of it was because people can get very engaged in a project where they're talking about where they're going and the future and how that connects to themselves. If we went into this community and just said, we're going to build a participatory data stewardship program, come and design a governance system with us, we would not have gotten the engagement we got. And that was a good lesson learned from us. So how does this lead to our desire to facilitate and support a community of practice? I just put up the mission statement for that community of practice up here, because it connects directly into that. So what we want to do is bring together a community of practitioners, researchers, advocates, community members to share best practice, discuss challenges, and build projects around participatory, almost said it, data stewardship. And I think it's that second point around discussing challenges that really inspires us. Because whilst we were running this project, it sounds great afterwards to come to you and tell you about all the successes we had, all the amazing things we did. Look at us, we're fabulous, we ran this project. But the reality, and getting into the weeds of it, was not always like that. And we didn't have a forum to go to share about some of the pitfalls of the work we were doing. I'm going to share one short example and then hand the microphone over. So we originally did not cite the project in Witness. We had it in a different community. We spent a lot of time engaging with that community, literally walking the streets. We had a huge project team, especially from Capacity, going out, knocking on doors, talking to business owners, talking to cafe owners, everything to try and understand what happened in their community and what kinds of projects they might want to do. And essentially we got nothing. We did 3 months of recruitment and had 2 people recruited. It was embarrassing, to say the least. And we started having some bigger conversations with different people. And what we discovered, unfortunately, was that there was a business in the local area, I'm trying to be very vague on this, that was historically supportive of white supremacy organizations and had been hosting white supremacy organizations in there. And they had found out about our project and did not want us in their community. They had been, to quote, gaming the system by over-reporting crime, nuisance crime in areas to try and up the data statistics about their area to show there being more crime than there was. Obviously, with white supremacy amongst people who weren't white. So there was immense community tensions there that we were not aware of. And we had had at least 24 conversations with policymakers, with local organizations before we came into that community, and that never came up. So once we found that out, it was obviously a big project risk. And we decided to recite the project, but we had a very intense conversation about what we meant by participatory stewardship and empowerment. If our goal is to empower people, do we want to be empowering a white supremacy organization to do more with data? And the answer to that is obviously no, but it is an ethical challenge, right? It's not a neutral action going into community and saying, we're giving you all of this resource, all this money, all of this quote unquote shifting of power to you without considering who you're shifting it to and what you're doing. And so we didn't have a forum to discuss this. Obviously we had our team and we chatted and we asked for outside opinions, but what we would have loved is to have a group to bring this to and to chat through. And our dream is to create a community of practice where we could do something like that. And I will end there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you for really giving us a very strong indication of both the richness of these types of projects and the challenges that we face. I'm very mindful of this as we go into the landscape mapping, because obviously we're going to be trying to aggregate this into some manageable stories, but each of those individual data points is going to be a story that has the kind of richness that you've just described. I'm going to pause for a moment on definitions, because I think the definitions are actually important, and ask just briefly, what is data stewardship? We talk about it a lot. What is it? When we started this project back in 2021, there were lots of different views. I remember the Royal Society was using stewardship to describe a body mandated to ensure responsible use. So they were talking about a body. Mozilla Foundation were using it as a term to describe the act of empowering agents in relation to their own data. And Open Data Institute, represented in the room, can correct me if I'm wrong, described it as embodying a fiduciary relationship of trust. between data stewards and data beneficiaries. So that's where we were in 2021. As I go through, I think we're going to see that that definition has moved on a bit, and we're interested in that. Thinking about these participatory mechanisms for data stewardship, Rima, as she discussed, set out this framework for participation. It's here behind us to understand how and where people have different levels of control and agency over their data. And for us, sorry, when I say us, I mean Ada. Data stewardship distinguishes governance, so the structural conditions that enable data to be used in trustworthy ways, from a narrowly compliance-based approach, which is not to say that compliance doesn't matter. Compliance does matter, but is to say that data stewardship is not a mechanism to avoid the rule of law when it comes to data. It's part and parcel of the same big picture. So equally, the argument that data can engender public benefit shouldn't be used as an escape clause for those who develop, deploy, and use data to avoid compliance or these other moral requirements. So for us, data stewardship is understood as a framework of rights and responsibilities and an ethic, slightly difficult word, but going to use it anyway, that embodies responsibility not just to one's own self or one's own organisation, but also to others. You have to bear with me because I'm struggling a little bit with my arrow mouse. It's not a problem, Zoe, it's just my hand coordination. So some of those uses that we want to highlight through that, it's really fine, I think, want to highlight through the landscape mapping are intended to mobilise that sense of responsibility, and I'm really taking that through the thinking that we're doing. So in the landscape mapping, we want to explore the role that alternative data governance mechanisms can play in enabling people to shape the beneficial uses of their data, building on the foundations established by regulatory frameworks. We also recognise that greater clarity is needed on what participation is, who it's supposed to serve, how it can be used in specific contexts, and how it's related to the mechanisms and approaches already available. So our landscape mapping aims to support that understanding, taking into account how complex each of these different stories about data governance are going to be. So moving on to the mapping, we're interested in building this understanding about the current conditions, opportunities, benefits, barriers. We're designing a holistic exploratory mapping of international practice that includes questions like who is working in this area, where are clusters of work or themes like data trusts occurring, how are people describing this work themselves, what methods are people using, what outputs do projects have, what evidence of outcomes is there. There's a lot of work that's been done over the last few years, and we're really interested in where that work has got to and in what the current status of that work is. From there, the work that will be completed in the case studies will include where are distinctions in the mapping. So if we're talking about novel or innovative uses or disciplinary differences or diverse communities or differences in objectives, how do they come together into different groups? How can we understand that? What are emerging practices, maybe public sector contexts that are underexplored? What distinctive proposals or models or solutions are working in practice, and which specific industry, policy, community contexts are we seeing? Is there any evidence of networking effects? Are people working together to create these things? And where is there evidence that the how-to questions arising from these scenarios are beginning to be answered? Where is there evidence that we're getting somewhere in our theoretical understanding of these things? Understanding this mapping, as Rima said at the beginning, is a critical appraisal of concepts of inclusion and inclusivity alongside justice and equity. So that's foundational to the work that we're going to do. One emerging perspective that we really want to explore, and this is very nascent, we're at the beginning of this research, I should say. I don't have any answers in case anyone wants to ask me that later. But it's a question that we're really interested in, is what does data stewardship mean in the context of large language models and generative AI? We think this presents a particular challenge because data currently makes its way into language models in ways that are neither transparent nor governed. You'll see here on the left, the mapping of purposes of different participatory mechanisms that was included in the Participatory Data Stewardship report. This is a flow of things that we would recognise in terms of data governance and the mechanisms that sit around it. On the right, there are two tables setting out stakeholders of data included in training sets for large language models and different actors in a proposed governance structure for that. So this is work by Gurneet et al. It's based on some work that Hugging Face have done, looking at an alternative data governance model. And we're just beginning to think about how to pull that through into what we're doing. What we expect is that we'll be exploring particularly how participatory data stewardship could function in the context of large language models. Their challenge is to design a data governance structure that appropriately handles varied data sources while respecting the rights and interests of stakeholders. So lots of information is scraped into a large language model, and then how do you unpick whose information is in there, who has rights, how do you unpick all these things? They're interested in what they call a human-centric data within this digital language data in the public realm. So they're interested in news, in blogs, in social media posts, in radio shows, in digitized books, where the data is found and whose rights need to be accounted for. I think we're going to be interested in environments where people's data is used in large language models with or without their knowledge, but in ways that might affect their lives. So probably in public service contexts, these kind of things, that's the direction that we think we're going to go in. I'm just going to change tack for a minute to come back to the why questions. Rima's touched a little bit on the context that we're in now. We're about to go into an AI summit. We're thinking very hard in this country about AI and data and these things. And this is really just to demonstrate that this isn't just sort of abstract work that we've decided to do, that it really matters. It really matters that people get to have a say in how their data is used. So just to change tack a bit, come back to the why questions and close out with what we think are 3 concrete outcomes from public participation that definitely underpin this work for us, and also do slightly bring us back into this current context and Rishi Sunak's announcement this morning and various other things. So firstly, most significantly, public participation helps to address ethical, societal, legal questions of technology by drawing on people's lived experience, on crowd wisdom, on deliberative reasoning, on public attitudes, and all of these provide valuable data and evidence to understand problems, to identify solutions and signal what good looks like in terms of data and AI. Secondly, legitimacy. The question we ask ourselves is what gives any organisation the ability, the right to claim that their actions are in the best interests of the general public if it doesn't engage with people's perspectives and values. And thirdly, that public participation makes organisations accountable to the members of the public they represent by directly gathering their perspectives and demonstrating publicly how they will address them. So these are 3 things that we're taking into this work. I did lastly just want to say something very small about the policy environment we're in, because we're really convinced that public participation is central to data and AI decision making. We really do think it matters. We're seeing this very complex picture of power and trust and benefits and harms that needs to be explored. We're also seeing an appetite for public engagement in policy that needs to be met with robust evidence that can't be misused or misconstrued. There's an opportunity there. We published a report today. It's called What Do the Public Think About AI? And it demonstrates that there's a significant body of solid evidence about what the public does think and want. It also gives us something to think about in terms of, sorry, I've lost my thread. Just give me 1 sec. Yeah, so what we were doing was 2 things. We were demonstrating that there was a consistent view of the public on various things, and also thinking about policymakers and what policymakers need to do in order to really enable embedding participatory practices. And some of that is understanding that public attitudes research, engagement, participation involve really distinct methods. So really understanding what the methods are. We think policymakers need to understand a bit more about this, understanding that these kinds of complex and contested topics that we're needing really benefit from careful, deep public engagement, and that using participation as a consultative or a tick box exercise risks undermining the trustworthiness, the legitimacy of these kind of processes that we're invested in and trying to use. Most importantly, that these sorts of deliberative participatory engagements can provide informed and reasoned policy insights from diverse publics. It's actually useful to policy to use these types of mechanisms. And that these empirical practices, the evidence, the research, can offer solutions to policymakers, particularly in areas where public views are not settled. The nuance of that matters, and pausing on the nuance, not wanting to leap straight to a settled conclusion, is also important. All of which is to say, we really think that this work matters. Thank you very much for listening to all of us. We're going to open up to questions now from the panel. If you're online, please either type into the Q&A or raise your hands. And if you're in the room, please raise your hands to ask a question. And now Rima can clap, which is what you want to do. Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone in the room has a question. Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay, my name is Stefano Boff. It's the first time I'm here. And I have some consideration concerning data. I mean, yes, it's true. I'm supporting the data that you can't do anything without data. But I see data more in terms of innovation. So the question is, where do you see innovation? I mean, you generate innovation through the data, and this means that this will let you implement all the principles that you mentioned on this topic. Second question is generative AI. I mean, we are looking for ecosystem using data, using generative AI. When I say we have a project, we are planning to develop a project using generative AI in the context of innovation ecosystem. And that's always here is the question is data. That is at starting point. Now, the question is, at the end, is the relationship between data, innovation, involvement of participatory approach, and therefore develop even, say, strategies in this context.
Shall I take the question about innovation, because it's something that has long interested me. And when I started off in this field, there wasn't as much talk about data. So I was very interested in responsible research and innovation. And I mean, I suppose what happened is you had the increasing datafication of research. You know, your ability to gather greater volumes of data now means that the field of responsible research and innovation itself is quite overlapping with the idea of responsible data use and management. So I think that my answer is that I sort of see them as quite overlapping concepts or ideas in different ways. And then also this kind of conversation about innovation is interesting because it reminds me of the innovation curve and where we are at in different stages and the different across the different life cycles of innovation. But most innovations nowadays seem to involve the use of data in some way, shape, or form. So I suppose my answer is I'm interested in your view as to whether you think there is a connection between the two, or whether we've got different languages to talk about similar things.
People are interested
Yeah.
in economic growth. So you cannot have economic growth if you don't have an engine like innovation. And that's why they are more interested. And then you can justify data, because it's data that will bring this engine and therefore motivate people to understand better what is the data.
Yeah, it comes back to your question of what you see the purpose of innovation as, whether it's exclusively for the purpose of growth, or whether you think innovation should serve societal goals or values, and someone like Mazzucato would talk about innovation being mission oriented, but that wasn't the only question. So yeah,
it's a very good answer. I was interested to explore with you whether you see innovation and methods of governance as being in opposition. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'm slightly hearing that you may feel like they are in conflict with each other to some extent. And for me, that's part of the challenge of this project, is understanding where projects map across that curve. I don't think they're in opposition with each other. I think there is space for them to be mutually to produce growth together. But I think that there's space to explore that, and the participatory element of it means that we will be really interested in people's views on that.
I think maybe we should move on to another question, but maybe I'll just quickly say there's different ways of thinking about the world, not to get too big up there. But when we think about the future, right, there's this assumption that in order to have innovation and growth, that there needs to be no limitation, similar to what you were saying. There's that empty future horizon we're working towards. And to have effective innovation, it needs to happen in a space in which everyone can constantly be innovating and trying whatever they want. But that is a socio-technical imaginary. That's a thing we've decided exists, and a model and a way of thinking. But as Octavia was saying, the challenge of participatory stewardship and governance of AI or any kind of technology or data is that it's fundamentally challenging that worldview. And I think that's where you find disquiet and discomfort, is that we assume to have growth and innovation, we have to have no limitation, but that is something we've just decided, and we can decide some other way of working and test and model different ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing non-innovative about participatory or inclusive data stewardship. It's just that it is innovative. It's a different goal. It's not the goal of growth. It's the goal of inclusivity, or the goal of inclusion and engagement. So I think that this is very much at the heart of the innovation conversation.
Tim?
Yeah, I guess to build a question off that of how we would fit participation methods to different governance contexts or different problems. And we're talking a lot in our work about like the governance stack, the fact that a lot of work in the past has looked at participation in terms of one case study of an event that happens or an activity. But actually the interest is, how does that layer in with the stewardship model? Where's stewardship located in relation to its power in the organisation? What's the overlapping sets of pathways of participation for people to engage and come to power? At the same time, we're working in a technology space which wants decisions fast, which is moving fast and breaking things in ways that participatory processes are often about moving slowly, deliberatively, thinking, engaging. So to turn that into a question, I guess I'm curious how you're planning in the landscape work and the other work to pick apart or see these different parts of participation as more than the participatory event, but as how it links with these other things.
It's such a good question. I think I said at the beginning that we're in the very early stages of designing this research, so I'm going to use that partly as my get out clause now, and say it's exactly the kind of question that we're thinking about. So we're taking an inductive approach. We're going to start with a fairly keyword-based approach to the literature, and from that we're intending to develop into themes and to get into the richness of the individual examples that we come up with, and do more analysis, thematic mapping to get into the kinds of questions that you're raising. I would love to talk to you about it again as we get into it.
Yeah, I do think this is very much about the culture, the sort of post-Cambridge analytical culture that could emerge for technology, which is about moving slow and building better. And I do remember many years ago now, I wrote a blog about move slower, slightly slower, and build better things. It is very tempting to sort of go for the move fast mantra and ethos, but the reality is you get tech flash, and you get in the long run a suboptimal outcomes. And so participatory and inclusive approaches do seem to be about taking the time to involve people and investing resources up front in doing that, so that the development of data systems improve, the development of AI technologies improve. And it's going to take a while for that culture to change, but I think there's a cultural shift that does seem to be happening.
Nothing to add.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions on that? Oh, George.
There's an online question. I'm going to read out.
That would be great. Yeah,
It's
thank
quite
you.
long, so bear with me. But do you have experiences with data stewardships / participatory data within marginalised populations? We started a couple of years ago a project called Data Act that looked into privacy rights of victims of trafficking. So it looked rather into data protection provisions and not so much into inclusive participatory data use. Are you aware of marginalised populations that organises its own data governance? I'm curious how we can adopt this approach within our European network of anti-trafficking NGOs.
Brilliant. Good question. I'm just going to repeat that for other people's benefit. So the question is, are we aware of particular examples where participatory data stewardship is used with marginalised populations?
Their context is in anti-trafficking, but obviously it could be other examples.
Yeah, great. I'll start that off. It's something that comes up a lot in the literature, and actually we commissioned a series of blog case studies looking particularly at instances of marginalised communities who were innovating models of participatory data stewardship. So those are all on the Ada Lovelace Institute website. There are some fantastic examples that exist and that challenge the power dynamics, the sort of traditional models that we would bring in, an entirely different ethic, an entirely different system of governance, and they're really worth looking at, and that'll be part of the mapping that we're doing.
I would add, there's two ways to think about that. One, the term marginalization is obviously a very big umbrella term, and it covers a lot of different populations that can fall on that power asymmetry scale. We think about it in two ways. One is in how we design our participatory practices, and that we're designing it with the thought that we're trying to reach people who have existing ways of working and to work with them in the way they're already working rather than designing a new system on top of that. But on the other side, we base a lot of our work on incredible work done in other countries around Indigenous data sovereignty, like I mentioned. And I think the models of Indigenous data sovereignty globally, as well as particularly in Canada, where I'm most familiar with it, I think are a great place to look at mapping some participatory data stewardship practice.
Yeah, I just wanted to add briefly to that. So recently I was invited to participate in a South Asian biobank, so very specifically aimed at recruiting members of South Asian communities, which I thought was really interesting and definitely will be part of this next wave, because I thought it was interesting that that there is that level of underrepresentation. It would be interesting to see the extent to which the new model or the different model had addressed or overcome the structural barriers to representation. But yes, so biobanks is a good example historically of not representing all communities equally in the data sets. So there are now models of biobanks that have been adopted. Canada and New Zealand in particular have got Indigenous-led genomics banks effectively. So those are good examples. We can look overseas increasingly. And then lots of interesting work the Apti Institute are doing on data cooperatives in India. Yeah, so I'm quite conscious, aware of some of that work as well.
Yes, please.
If I could supplement, IDS published recently published a report on the mapping review of humanitarian project using AI. Supported, I think, the author removing Asian ideas, and they have a list of all projects, and they analyze the degree of participation in that project. So all project they have been mapping, and I remember the statistics saying only 33% of the project has some participatory element, and even though mentioned participatory, they have different level of participation, collaboration or consultation. So they do range. council level. And regarding to anti-trafficking, because like my PhD about like AI in human trafficking, I thought I still have like traffic analysis hub where they analyze the survivor story and then like they put together to analyze the patterns of of the training and the patterns and have analyze using like sentiment analysis to see like what the like psychology, the mental impact, and for example, like put using like name entity recognition to see like okay, they have a link between like this country and the other country, so they have one an active field going on. But I find like it's like to a deeper level of like engage with survivor and victim. I'm not sure like we reached that stage yet, but we're just like working on more like on the surface of like public story and through like NGO law enforcement rather than working with directly with the survivor or victim. I think because of some like ethical concern.
That sounds like a really interesting example. Thank you for sharing. We have actually come to the end of our time already. So I think remains for me to say thank you all so much for coming online as well. We are going to be sharing a opportunity to sign up for more engagement with this project, to sign up to be part of the community of practice. We'd really appreciate it if people would step forward for that. That would be great. But from me, thank you so much, everybody.
And yes, I just wanted to add to that and say that if anyone would like to share case studies for qualitative research interviews, that would also be part of this call. So we will follow up with you by a link. But yes, huge amounts of, I just want to hand on to Emily, a huge amount of thanks to Emily for all her work. Yeah.
No, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll be reaching out to a lot of people in the room about the community of practice as well directly.
Yeah, thank you for engaging so brilliantly with this work. We really appreciate it. I want to say one last thing, which is that it felt very strange launching the first version of participatory data stewardship exclusively online and not really being able to tell what level of engagement the work had generated, because of course we were in the middle of a pandemic. So it's just so nice to have people both able to be with us from all over the world and also with us in person. It's actually really nice to have that. And the liminality, I was explaining liminality to Octavia, is very important. Being rooted in a place, that's very important, but also being able to share international views and perspectives. So thank you so much. All right, take care.